Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Psychosin project here on That Metal Station. Joining me over Skype is the owner of one of the biggest metal labels around, Metal Blade Records. I am, of course, talking about Brian Slagel. I hope I pronounced your last name right.
You did great.
How you doing, man?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm good. Now, you're about to release your first book, For the Sake of Heaviness. What made you decide now was the time to write a book on your experiences setting up a record label?
Well, kind of figuring out what we were going to do for our 35th anniversary, and it just kind of made sense to do a book. People were talking about us doing a book for a long time, so we figured, all right, why not do it now? And before I start forgetting the stories and whatnot, so we figured that was the time to start working on it a couple of years ago, and here we are.
Excellent. So it's been in the sort of been worked on in the background for a few years then.
Yeah, we had to start. Doing this takes a lot longer than I thought it would. But yeah, we started about 2 years ago, kind of getting it together, and we got it all done, and it's finally out and coming out soon.
Excellent. Now you've got the foreword, which is written by Lars Ulrich of Metallica. How did you manage to get him involved?
Well, obviously, I've been friends with him since, gosh, it's been like 37 years now, which is kind of scary. And he was, really such an integral part of the early part of the label. Just, us being friends before we ever did anything, and then obviously, he's had a lot more success than I have, but still, it's pretty amazing. So, I hate asking those guys for anything, but I asked him and said, hey, I'm doing a book. Would you mind doing the foreword? He said, yep, no problem, I'm in. And wrote some, incredibly nice things. So it was pretty cool to have him do that. And, it was just an awesome part of the book.
Excellent. Now, talk about the label itself. Metal Blade became part of the sort of big push towards making death metal a popular genre in the late 80s, early 90s. Now, what was it about those bands and that style that drew you to them that made you think, I need these guys on my label?
Well, we were a little bit late to that sort of thing. Some of the other labels had gotten in a little bit earlier than we did, but I just liked the fact that it was super heavy. And at that point, what was going on in metal was, we were kind of getting over all the really light hairbandy sort of stuff. So the opposite way for us to go would be to sign the super heavy stuff. So Once we kind of saw that was happening and there were some really good bands out there, we wanted to work with them and kind of, shake things up, I guess.
So it was essentially a reaction to what I guess you could call the hair hangover, as it were.
kind of, sort of. I mean, that sort of, real super heavy stuff was so opposite of that it made sense.
Excellent. Now, for people who maybe have never really listened to much of the Metal Blade Records roster or anything, if they would pick up the book, what could they expect to read about in there?
Well, I think it's a really interesting history of heavy metal, really, from 1982 all the way until today. We've been around for so long, and we've worked with so many bands that people have heard of, whether it's Metallica and Slayer in the early days, or Guns N' Roses, Alice in Chains, Faith No More in the mid 90s, and on from there. So it's it's an interesting story of how a record label started and kind of worked, and the how things work in the business world. It's a little bit different, the difficulties and the non-difficulties, and there's a lot of great stories from a lot of great people. You've got as you mentioned, Lars, James Hetfield from Metallica, Kerry King from Slayer, so many people in there talking about the history of metal. It's a really good, in addition to the history of the record company, I think it's a fairly decent history of heavy metal in the last 35 years.
Well, a couple of years to sort of get everything. Now, going back to talking about one of the probably more well-known bands on the label, Cannibal Corpse. When you first saw the art for their albums, were you expecting it to sort of cause as much controversy as it did back in the early 90s?
Oh yeah, we had a pretty good indication, especially when we saw Butchered at Birth, which I absolutely love.
Yeah.
The cover. I kind of figured, because there were a couple people in the office that were like, "Ooh, this is a little much." I go, "Nope, I love it. I don't care. We're going to put it out there." I mean, I grew up with Kiss and Alice Cooper, being a big fan of theirs when I was a kid, so I like people that push the boundaries, and that certainly was pushing the boundaries. And this is, right on the heels of the PMRC and kind of all that, ridiculous movement that was happening. So The crazier the cover for me, the better. So I loved it.
So really, it was more about pushing the boundaries and a kind of, how can I put it, kind of a unconscious reaction to the whole PMRC thing.
Sure, and I mean, look, and ultimately, it's the band's art, and whatever our artists do, whatever art they create, whether musically or visually, we're 1,000% behind, and this was their idea and what they wanted to do. I'm the last person in the world that's going to tell them not to do it, but I certainly did enjoy it immensely.
Well, you have to really. I mean, some of those covers are indeed so over the top that as much as you enjoy the music, you can't help but think, how did they get away with this? It has to be said. And I'm glad there are labels like yourself that are out there letting these covers be released and going, you know what, if people want to have a problem with it, that's their problem, not ours. We're letting the artists do what they need to do. So
Exactly.
Now, going back to the beginning, how did the idea to set up Metal Blade come about?
Well, really didn't. I never really set out to start a record company or anything at all like that. I was living in LA. I was doing a heavy metal fanzine. I was working at a record store selling a lot of metal. And I realized that there was this scene in LA of all these metal bands that no one outside of LA knew existed. And even some people inside LA didn't know existed. And I felt that if somebody didn't do something to help promote this, that people might not ever know that it existed. So
yeah.
Got the idea to put together a compilation album. I was a huge fan of the new wave of British heavy metal, and that was a massive influence on me. And they were doing compilations there, like Metal from Mothers and things like that. And kind of a do-it-yourself independent attitude. So I thought, well, if they could do it, why can't I do it? And just put together a compilation album of local LA heavy metal bands that included at the time Rat and Bitch and Malice and Metallica, and put it out there. And then once that came out, I didn't have any money. I barely had enough money to make the first 2,500 copies of it. But one of the distributors that had distributed for me said, well, we know you don't have any money, but it seems like you kind of know what you're doing. We'll give you a pressing and distribution deal. So if you can bring us something, we'll spend the money to manufacture and distribute it for you. I thought, that's an interesting idea. So I went with them and tried to get bands to give me some music to put out. And that's kind of how the label started.
Excellent. Now, it obviously started back in 1982. Now, I don't mean to make you feel old here, but that was also the year I was born. So it's a good year to be born in. Now, when you set up the label, did you ever expect it to get as big as it has done?
Never in a million years. I mean, none of us back then in the early 80s ever thought that this whole metal scene was going to be so big, or that we'd all be talking about this 35 years later. That was the furthest thing from any of our minds. We were just huge metalheads, just trying to do something at the time to promote the music we loved, and we never, ever, ever thought it would ever get this big. It's still, when you sit down every once in a while and think about it, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, that's the best way to start a label. Not for business reasons, but because you love the music, and you found bands you're like, these guys just aren't getting out there, more people need to hear them, which seems to be kind of the ethos of Metal Blade, if you don't mind me saying.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially back then, this is pre-internet, pre-cell phones, pre-computers, pre-everything. So, yeah, it was, and it's still our mindset today. Is we just want to find cool bands and turn people on to them.
Excellent. Now, the label managed to survive many musical shifts in the landscape of metal, which has changed about 4 or 5 times over the last 10 years alone, I believe. How do you think the label has managed this?
Well, I like all sorts of styles of metal, and we were never really married into one specific genre over all these years. So I think that really helped us kind of move around, and we always are kind of trying to think, what's next? What's the next thing coming up? What's the next exciting thing that we hear that we think is cool? And we've been pretty lucky over all these years to be able to kind of, find out the next thing. And because the catalog is a wide-ranging catalog of so many different genres, we didn't, like some other labels, get stuck in like one specific type of music, and that made it easier for us to transition through all these things. Even the grunge thing, when metal kind of went away and the grunge came out, I mean, I was a huge fan of that scene, and we ended up doing a lot of marketing for Alice in Chains and Faith No More and Soundgarden and a lot of those bands, so it kind of helped us out get through those years as well.
Excellent. Now, I know you said it took a few years to get the current book that's about to be released to get assembled and compiled and out. But now that's all done and coming out over the next couple of weeks, have you got any ideas maybe kicking around for a follow-up?
Yeah, I mean, if I realized after I did the book, there's a lot of stuff that were kind of left out. I didn't really talk a lot about the, hanging out with bands sort of thing, because it just felt like it was, there's a few of those things in there, but it was more about the history of the label and kind of the history of metal overall. So there's a lot of stuff in there. So if I'm lucky enough that enough people like this book to write another one, it would be a lot of fun. And that one might be the more fun kind of, hanging out with bands sort of vibe. We'll see. Like I said, if I get lucky enough to do another one, we'll see. But there certainly is enough material for it.
I'm sure you will, man. I'm sure you will. Now, the label itself has one of the most diverse rosters of acts signed to it. Was that always the plan, or just how things played out over the years?
I mean, I don't know that there's, I hate to say this, but I'm not sure there was ever a real plan behind all of this. We just kind of, go as we see fit.
A happy accident.
But because of like so many different styles of music, I always wanted to have a lot of different stuff. Like I love the fact that we have Cannibal Corpse and King's X on the same label, even though they're completely different bands, and probably not a lot of fans of either band would be fans of the other one. But I like every style, so I've always wanted to be different. I've always wanted to have a different stuff out there. But the core is we want it to be metal. I'm not going to sign a country act or a rap act or any of that stuff. All the core process of everything it's in that core space of heavy metal, wherever the genre within that might be. So
it's basically it's got to have the riffs in there. It's got to have something special about it. Otherwise, you're not the label for that band, basically.
Exactly. It's got to have the heavy, fuzzy guitars and some riffs in there. Exactly.
Excellent. Now, looking back over the lifetime of Metal Blade, as you said, you've done some promotion for other bands and all that. Do you ever look back on some of the bands that you were like speaking to, or bands that you maybe had a possible chance of signing, and wish you had actually got round to signing them?
Yeah, there's definitely a couple of those. I mean, it's kind of funny. I mean, obviously, Metallica being the first one,
yeah.
But we had no money, they had no money, so there's really no way to make that happen. So that was one where it's not that really missed out. It's just wrong, right place at the right time to help them start, but after that it wasn't. But certainly Guns N' Roses is one where I definitely missed out on that one, because they were playing around LA a lot, and we knew their manager, and all these people were talking about them, and there's a big buzz. They said, "Oh, you really should go see them. They're really great." But I thought they were a glam band. I thought they were in that whole glam scene, and I just wasn't into that. So I never went to go see them. And then when I heard Appetite for Destruction, I'm like, "Oh, whoops!" Band is really good. I probably should have gone to see them. And then we also got offered Pantera Cowboys from Hell album, but they wanted a lot of money at the time for it.
Right.
Again, in retrospect, we probably could have made that happen if we really wanted to, and I probably should have. But there you go.
Hindsight's always 20/20, man.
Yeah, I mean, look, I have no regrets. I mean, we've had an amazing career, and I'm working with a ton of amazing bands. So you can't win them all, and it's all good.
Indeed. I mean, you've got the right bands now to sort of continue the band going for this long as it is and still going strong. So that's all good, man. Now, I admit you may not want to answer this next question, but are there any bands that the label currently has its eye on?
There are a couple, and there's a couple that we're almost have our deals done, but I can't divulge that information
yet,
other than to say keep an eye on metalblade.com in the next couple of weeks, and you'll see the next two bands that we're signing. Unfortunately, one of them we only have for parts of the world, and we have North America, Australia, Japan, a couple of other things. But I'm super excited about these things, and I think there are a couple bands that we'll hear from for a while. So just keep an eye on the metalblade.com site. You'll see it come up. Trust me, I'm dying to tell you, but until we get the final paperwork back with all the signatures, I gotta refrain from it. But it's almost there.
That's fair enough. Obviously, you don't want to give it away and maybe jinx it a little bit, as it were.
Sure, but I will say though that there's some really, we're definitely looking a lot at kind of the more traditional metal bands right now. There's a lot of great scenes coming up there. So there's, you'll probably see some more stuff in that genre as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've got where I live, which is in the UK. As you can probably tell by my accent. We've got a fantastic band here that very much hoping someone signs them because they're doing so well. But I'll talk to you a bit about that later or something.
All right, cool. Yeah, please.
Now, talking about that, but what is the future for yourself and the label?
Well, I think it's kind of more of the same. I mean, I don't think there's any real shift in what we're doing. You know, we want to continue working with really good bands, continue to, obviously we have a huge catalog of phenomenal bands we've been working with for a long time that we're going to continue with. Like we have a new Black Dahlia Murder record coming out, a new Cannibal Corpse record coming out. We have finally a King Diamond CD DVD coming out early next year, and a King Diamond studio album as well. And, you know, looking, as I just mentioned, signing new bands. So I don't think, you know, the philosophy and what we do is going to change a whole lot. And we're just, you know, riding with how the industry rolls these days.
Excellent, excellent. Now, finally, something I want to ask you myself, because I've wanted to start a record label myself over the last few years. Have you got any advice for anyone who's thinking of starting a new label?
Well, first of all, I encourage people to do that because we need more good labels out there for sure. It's an interesting time to do that. There's a lot of, you know, you've got so many different facets of, you know, you've got vinyl and CDs and downloads and streaming, and there's so many different ways things are going. But I think first and foremost, if you're going to do that, do it for the love of the music. If you're doing it because you love the music and you really want to help out the artists and do it for the love of the music, then that's the best reason to start something like that, because invariably you'll come up with, you know, difficult situations or times will be tough and things aren't going to be really easy. But you just remember you're doing it for the love of the music and the betterment of the music scene. That'll help you kind of navigate all of those things and hopefully become successful.
Excellent. His new book, For the Sake of Heaviness, is out over the next couple of weeks. Brian Slagel, thank you very much for joining me on the show tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to you and all your listeners and everybody for all the support over all these years. We greatly appreciate it.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Thanks, man.